Good afternoon. My name is Bradley Pragnell, and I am a consultant with Payments Canada today. I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this summit session on faster payments the next 10 years. So what do we mean by faster payment systems? Well, fast payments is defined by the BIS, means a payment in which the transaction of the payment message and the availability of final funds to the payee occurs in real time or near real time, in as near to 24/7 day basis as possible. So these systems, which are also known as instant or immediate or real-time payment systems, are starting to pop up everywhere around the world. But generally, they share some common features, notably account-to-account credit transfers that are done quickly and at any time of the day. One recent industry report cited that there are 56 live systems with dozens in the pipeline, including Canada's own real-time rail, which Payments Canada will be launching in 2022. And these systems are all pretty recent. UK Faster Payments, seen by many as the first modern fast payment system, was launched in 2008. And the majority of the new systems have only been around for a few years, when most other bank-based payment infrastructures have histories that stretch back decades, if not centuries. So what can Canada and the United States learn from other markets? And what can we expect in terms of meeting unmet needs in a rapidly changing but complex market, where banks and payment service providers are expected to navigate faster payments alongside things like open banking, digital identity, digital currencies, and QR codes? So at this session, we're going to look at, well, where are we going to be over the coming decade, which has already begun with a pretty massive and unexpected disruption. I would now like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going in alphabetical order of surnames, so I'll first ask Jean Neyer. Jean, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Bradley, and really happy to be here. So my current role is as a head of a money movement platform for U.S.Bank, which is a top 5 bank in the U.S. And so I head up a product for all of the ways that money moves in and out of a person's bank account. Certainly, the real-time payment systems in U.S., such as real-time payments, and in the future, potentially FedNow, our P2P system called Zelle, and then the traditional ACH wire check rails. Now, prior to U.S.Bank, I was the head of product for a vendor that you might know, D&H, certainly one of the big Canadian fintechs. And in that role, had a global responsibility for payment hubs. And I think me and Liz got to know each other exactly in 2008 when we were putting in the UK faster payments. And since then, put in real-time systems around the world. In particular, we were the back end of Banco Centralen, which is the real-time payment system in Sweden. And me and Bradley did work on the real-time payment system in Southeast Asia. And I am also a board advisor to U.S. Faster Payments Council, which sort of links in with my keen interest in how we move to better ways of moving money. I've consulted and advised on payment modernization to FIs, fintechs, and countries. So really pleased to be here and speak on this timely and interesting topic.
Great. Thank you very much, Jean. Liz, can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself?
Today, I work at Mastercard. I'm the exec responsible for Mastercard Send. Mastercard Send enables consumers, businesses, and governments to send funds directly to a consumer's account using near real time or real time, depends really on the financial institution concerned, using the card number associated with that account. Prior to my current role at Mastercard, I've had a number of other roles in product and innovation. And before I joined Mastercard, I've spent 15 years working in and around faster payment systems, since, as Jean referenced, the development of faster payments in the UK. But I've worked pretty much around the world, and I've come across Brad and Jean and Jenny in my travels in various different jurisdictions as we've tried to improve payment systems as we've gone along. So delighted to join you here today. Mastercard also, as people know, is engaged in rolling out some of these systems all over the world as we speak. That's not my current role, but it's something that I'm also keeping a close eye on.
Great, thank you very much. And I had the pleasure of first meeting Liz on the new payments platform in Australia. So Liz was very influential and important in a lot of our decision making early on. And I was the head of policy at the Payments Association there. So yes, it's been I think over a decade of working with Liz, and it's been a great journey. Last, I'd like to ask Jenny Winther to introduce herself. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you so much. I'm joining you from Stockholm in Sweden, and I am now heading what is called the Nordic Payments Council, NPC, but also have a very long background in payments and payments infrastructure. So right now at the NPC, we are engaging in a large sort of transformation and harmonization project of harmonizing and simplify payments in the Nordics, and that would include Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. So what we want is to provide payment schemes, processes, and formats for doing harmonized payments in our region, as well as toward the Euro and the SEPA area. But I have also, prior to joining NPC, I worked at the only or the major ACH CSM clearinghouse in Sweden that Jean referred to, Bank Jarrett, where I was responsible then for all payment products and clearing services. But I was also heading the front end of the back end Jean talked about, which is a mobile wallet or a payment app service that was developed in Sweden and launched 2012, which is now a huge success. It's a more common way to pay in Sweden than using cash. So out of a population of 10 million people, we have now 7.6 million active users of that service. So it's used everywhere and for everything in the payments. So this is what I bring to the table today, the experience of what happened then and why it happened, and then also looking forward, what is going to be the next thing going forward. So really exciting to be here today and talking to you.
Great, thank you so much, Jenny. Look, I'm going to start working my way through some questions, and like I said, looking forward to the discussion over the next 50 minutes or so. So Liz, I might start with you. Sort of before we talk about the future, can you tell us a little bit about the key features, and importantly, what have been the drivers behind the creation of these new systems?
Look to another country and go, oh, it's been easier for you guys. You had a push from your regulator, or you had a push from somebody else, basically. Someone else to blame for the fact that you had to get up and do some work. I always find this interesting because actually the key drivers in most countries are pretty consistent. So it's about improving the experience. It's improving the experience for the consumer, quite often for small businesses, but it's pretty much about dragging ourselves into the digital age. So how do we get our payment systems to step up and meet the needs of an economy that's increasingly moving to digital and online and facilitated by mobile phones, and the way that people, and if we look at our children, it's how are the kids going to transact when they're our age? And so when you start to factor in some of those things, it's all about convenience. It's about retaining trust, or trying to embed trust into a digital environment, whilst also having that speed and efficiency and reliability that we also take for granted from our payment systems, but really trying to do it, so it's instantaneous. So people can actually buy something online and have that instantaneous knowledge that the transaction has completed and gone through, or to have funds put into their account immediately. The biggest, challenge with all these features, we all take that for granted and we think, okay, that's, that all makes sense. Making it happen is really, really difficult. And then trying to figure out, where should that happen, and is it ubiquitous, and who's responsible, and where does everybody play in the ecosystem? So, but even just agreeing on those key drivers and attributes is really important up front, so that everyone agrees that we're all building towards the same goals. And I'm sure, Brad, that you would acknowledge that that's something that's incredibly challenging.
Yeah, definitely, Liz. That kind of leads me sort of to the next question, I guess. So Jenny, So what do you think have been some of the key design considerations and design choices behind the more successful deployment? So what are the key things that you really need to decide when you're creating a new fast payment system that the big rocks, I guess, I'm looking for?
Well, as Liz say, it's a complex word, and there are a lot of actors in the ecosystem. So first of all, and coming also in the Nordics, we have a very, very long tradition of collaboration between the different actors. Since we see this as infrastructure, we compete on products, but we collaborate on infrastructure. So first of all, I think that's one of the key features, to get as many people as possible around the table to really look at this from a collaboration point of view. If we talk design, and now we're sort of on the front end, people using it, the two major things we had when doing this was simple and secure, which is two sort of key issues for the ones using the system. And here, one of the very important pieces of the puzzle was that we have a nationwide mobile-enabled digital identity to use, which means that all Swedes can authenticate themselves and also sign payments in a secure way. And this is a trusted system throughout the society. We use it everywhere. And then, of course, the other features that we had was that we really wanted to link it to what Jean referred to earlier, to a real-time 24/7 central bank-backed settlement system. So it was account to account really happening in real time, and you can see the funds made available directly and so forth. So it was integrated throughout the whole ecosystem. It was nothing with having settlement later on or something. So that was also, maybe from a technicality point of view, but it was really important to create trust around this. You really got your money. They were there when using it. And then I think, why then, and why the enormous success? And then it's something about the stars aligning. We had a real problem in Sweden. We are highly card users, for example. People don't now and didn't carry cash. Hence, there was a problem. You couldn't pay your pal for the lunch or buy things online, person to person. So it started as a person to person service. But now, having such a huge reach, it has moved into e-commerce and also point of sales. So it's used everywhere. And now leading to that, we are one of the nations in the world that will probably, in all aspects, we are almost cashless already. But this has been one of the drivers towards it. But it was already there. We didn't carry cash, and we wanted to be honest and pay people. So this actually solved the problem that was out there. And the next thing was that we have a high penetration of both technology interested in adapt, and the smartphones were there. So I think it's sort of all in different aspects on why did it happen, and then.
Yeah, I think that's a good, and I might just throw a question to Jean now. I mean, I think one of the experiences that I've had is where are the transactions going to come from in terms of the questions? I mean, I can remember in Australia when we were looking at new payments platform, there was, we have a saturated market. People have online banking, they have cards, they have mobile apps. Where are the transactions going to come from? Where are they going to migrate from? So Jean, North America is quite a unique market. Pretty saturated in terms of card and other types of payment instruments. People are almost spoiled for choice. So where do you think the opportunities are associated with, and where are these new faster payment systems going to get their transactions from? Where are they going to migrate from?
Thanks, Bradley. If I could, let me take 30 seconds to just add something on what Jenny said, is that there are a couple of things that we found in US. One, for example, is that if you launch your system too early and you don't have enough of a critical mass, then that takes much longer to deploy. So I was actually part of a worldwide survey for one of the consultants, and of the real-time payment systems. And that was one of the learnings, that regardless of everything that you do, you need to make sure that your first wave have enough of a critical mass. The second thing, which again is really important in countries like Canada, where it's not command and control economy, is that it's not enough to build it. They will not come. You really do need applications. You really need something that will use the real-time payment system. So whether it is Swish in Sweden, whether it is commodity payment service in Australia, whatever it is, you really need to have something ahead of time, and you can't rely and you can't allow for the time lag between, yeah, the system is ready, now we're going to do the marketing. You have to start doing the marketing and education and everything else ahead of schedule. So now coming back into what does that mean and where do the transactions come from? So the one thing that we've learned from UK and other countries is that the myth of organic cannibalization just doesn't exist. ACH is sticky. Wires are sticky. If you are a corporation and you already have your ACH process, you're not going to disrupt it. Particularly, you're not going to disrupt it in the early stages where there is no ubiquity and you have to keep running the ACH on your wire systems anyway. Secondly, what we found, which is interesting in wires, it's either you do a lot of wires, in which case you've already negotiated pretty steep discounts with your banks, or you do a few wires, in which case it really doesn't matter what you do. So what we're seeing is the natural growth that existed before real-time payment systems flattens, doesn't go away, and you have a lot of the new use cases that come on to the real-time rails. Now, as Jenny said, the stars align in Sweden. The stars continue to align. So, for example, gig economy in US, many other places, generated a whole swath of people who were not served by existing mechanisms. So real-time payroll was an example where there was a technical need and there was readiness and there was like a massive user base ready to accept real-time payrolls. Whereas in UK, real-time payroll took a lot longer, because what that took is a bank picking up the phone, calling up a company and saying, hey, can I switch you over to the real-time payroll? On the other hand, and again, this goes back to, if the consumer or a corporate doesn't need to make a decision, if it happens in the background, then we see a switch. So for example, again, in UK, and we keep referencing UK for two reasons. It is the oldest modern one and they publish the most. So we have the most data about who's doing what. But there was a decision that your retail transfers through the web, they just switched them over to faster payments without asking the user. And so that was an example of a contextually targeted cannibalization. Similarly, in SEPA, Holland has decided that real-time payments are going to be a better ACH. So their German counterparts were incredibly surprised to all of a sudden see an influx of real-time payments, because they were expecting to see quite a slow ramp up. And then whoosh, the floodgates opened. So it's that managed or contextual driver that happens. Now, some things will happen organically. If you have a good P2P system and you have a lot of cash, then we see that the use of cash slows down. So that has obviously been an example of Sweden, has been an example of Denmark, etc. On the other hand, if the country has a history of not trusting the government, wanting to have, gray economy, the fact that Italy has two P2P systems still isn't necessarily moving the needle on the amount of cash in the economy. So again, it's very country dependent and very contextual in that sense. And the last thing I would say is this is a real thing. So we're now 12 years in, 13 years in UK. Real-time payments now take 10%, 12% of non-cash transactions. So real need has been demonstrated, and it came from reduction in cash. In US, it will come from some reduction in check, although it's incredibly hard because check has become a real-time payment instrument. I take a picture and it's in my account almost in real time. So a lot of the friction has gone away. And so at least in US, we continue to coexist with all of these payment instruments. And they could, because what's became sort of a modern equivalent of the new warfare is, in the past, the older rails did not adapt any new features. It was build it once, run it for 40 years, never change it. What's been happening now is every rail is adapting the best features from the previous rail. And so everybody is fighting for the transaction. So nobody is a natural winner anymore.
Yeah.
Every rail has to fight for every transaction and fight hard.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's great, Gene. Liz, I think, did you want to add something on this sort of migration issue and the secret sauce?
Yeah, well, I think also just picking up on Gene's comments around, yes, there is cash, obviously, as people choose to maybe not use quite so much cash or carry it for convenience. But I think there's also a whole raft of other things that are happening. A lot of it is about growing the pie. So, if I look at kind of how the younger generation is behaving and interacting, Twitch, Discord, e-gaming, esports, everything's electronic. Those new platforms, everything is instantaneous. Sometimes they don't even think that cards are fast enough. So, there's a whole raft of new things out there, whether it's buy now, pay later. And I was thinking of, Gene, when you mentioned payroll, paying out payroll is one question, and emergency payroll is something that people really like real-time payments for. Whatever means they use to get those funds into the customer's account. But the other thing that I think has been made possible by real-time payments is payroll advances and instantaneous lending and things around, we've all witnessed in the last year around the crisis that has, materialized as a result of COVID. Actually getting disbursements out to people has been something that, like, Mastercard has been really embedded in. And whether that's, using real-time payments in terms of an RTP system, or whether it's, using things like Mastercard Send, helping insurance companies, helping government entities, actually disperse funds to the most convenient point where the customer wants to receive the funds, quite frankly. And a lot of the time, they're not great at telling you their account number. So that could be quite challenging. We find that there are various different routes, and it's all about providing choice. So what's the account that the customer wants it to actually land in might not be the account from which they've been paying their insurance premiums, or it may be that they actually desperately need funds really right now because they have to move to a hotel, or they, maybe their house is burnt down. We've had so many different disasters and emergencies materialize in the last 12 months. We've really learned an awful lot about what people want and expect, and the better experience that you can provide. And so I think as we try to figure out what to do with the capabilities, actually customers, financial institutions, insurance companies, government departments are telling us what they need, because things are moving so fast. They really are thinking much more clearly and holistically around helping the customer. And I think that experience and being able to differentiate your services and say, as an insurance company, you can promise to a customer that they're going to get the funds in real time or within a couple of hours of making a claim, that the insurance adjuster has made all of those decisions, and these are really meaningful for people. So for us, it's not, I think as Jean described, it's not really about displacement. It's about evolving. It's about growing the capabilities that we all have. And it's about the economy changing and starting to be much more reactive. Institutions being able to hide behind a veneer and say, oh, that's the way it's always been done. That doesn't cut it any longer. So yes, now it has to be 10 times better. But I think as an industry, we're able to provide that capability and enablement that will, allow those financial institutions, insurance companies, government departments, businesses, and even consumers to provide a much better experience and a much better service. So for me, that's what it's really about. The price point is then, something that everybody debates, but it actually, that should be correlated with the experience or the benefit that people derive from it. So it's no longer a commoditization issue.
Jenny, I might just ask you to jump in there. You mentioned how Swish in Sweden had been adapted or used in a lot of newer contexts. So have there been any applications or uses that have sort of surprised you or surprised the industry, do you think, in terms of how consumers and businesses have adopted real-time payments, either in Sweden or in any of the other Scandinavian jurisdictions?
No, but I think it's very much down the line that Liz actually talks about. First of all, it was about more consumers to pay, but then first of all, the identity of yourself is the phone number, which is more likely that an insurance company actually has than an account number, which is up to date. Hence, payouts was sort of the next thing, both from like the Swedish tax authority as well as insurance companies and so forth. And spinning off with the new economy, I think the trend we're going for Jean talked about gig economy, but also sort of pay on demand, or all this, you pay for what you use right now, all of those kind of payment methods that actually could help. And what we also saw was now with the pandemic going around, more use cases of shopping online, and actually seeing then the most resistant group of people being elderly or not technically adept also moved into using needed to grocery shop online, for example, not going to shops and so forth. So in that sense, it was also increased. But I think we haven't seen the second wave yet. So looking ahead, we will see more and more of the actual sort of commercial uses or business to business usage of this, looking into how to, I think, going forward, optimize liquidity and those kind of things. We haven't seen that really yet. It has been more of a consumer behavior and paying backwards and forward in that sense. The next thing that I am really looking forward to is also how we bring this cross-border, and that's a bit what I'm working now to see how we could actually interact cross-currency, cross-borders, and making this happen real time. It's been very much community-wise right now, but I also really have to agree with Jean in the sense that, and learned that more and more, paying and payments are very cultural linked. So the way somebody wants to pay in one country is really different from, and it comes all back to history and trust. In the Nordics, we generally have very high trust in society, hence leaving digital footprints, it's no, and we've seen the same. I talk about Swish since I'm based in Stockholm, but we have the same services and the same take up both in Norway and in Denmark. So it's the same community. Whereas Central Europe, there are other things with not wanting to leave digital footprints and so forth. So it's interesting to see how this develops. But I'm really looking forward to cross currency and cross borders, and also the more of corporate usage of this. We haven't seen that to start with, and I have a strong belief that once, even though contradicting what you said, Jean, once the rails are in place, we will see how the usage will develop too. There are things we haven't thought about yet.
If I can add just a very quick anecdote from Sweden, the use case that we never thought of. Well, one, it seems to actually smooth out the beer consumption, because we can actually see how the number of pints being bought in the pub correlates with payments being done at midnight on payday. But the other thing that was interesting, there was a telethon in Sweden, and the announcer said, okay, let's all swish to this charity at the top of the hour. And that really spiked the volume that second, which is the behavior that we don't see in ACH, we don't see in wires. So those are some of the sort of unusual things that you don't think about until they actually happen to you. And then you say, oh, of course, that was obvious.
Jean, remember that?
Jean, I'd add actually
big charity on TV, and they were sort of, it was in the beginning, an infancy of Swish too, and now you see it everywhere in the subways with QR codes. You scan the QR code, and you can actually then donate money to all kinds of, and that's, as you say, that's an instantaneous. You see on TV. Famine happening somewhere, and people just have their phone and they swish the money. So you don't have to go and hook up to an internet banking application or anything. So right, good point.
Right, Liz, you wanted to say something?
It's also something we witnessed in the UK with the tax authority. Who knew that people wanted to pay their taxes instantaneously? But actually, the behavior model was more that people could pay at the very, very last minute. So the tax authority didn't really think about that, or had not anticipated that the first time it happened. And we had a very similar experience where, the bank that was banking them had a massive influx of tax payments on the last day. And of course, then you've got to post that money to the accounts. And that's, I think that's the piece that sits behind, where we all assume that that's really simple. You just get the money to the bank and the bank will figure it out. And often that's the hard yards at the back end that requires quite a lot of engineering to make sure that the huge, vast numbers of accounts that are supported in many of these institutions need to be linked to all these systems and linked to them, with all of the requisite functionality that goes with that. It's really interesting to see how people's behavior changes. And I totally agree with Jenny and Jean. But we have to also think that through much more broadly than I think we've ever thought about it before.
So Jenny, you mentioned earlier a little bit around digital identity. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how important digital identity is. Maybe mention a little bit about how Bank ID works, because I think identity and alias is actually quite an important piece of the puzzle in some of these systems, isn't it?
Right. First of all, the digital identity, and this is also equal to all the Nordic countries. We have a similar setup both in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. And in Sweden, it's called Bank ID. So it was, again, a collaboration, as we do things in our countries, between all the major banks to create a digital identity. This is back in the 1990s, actually, when that was first launched. And now it's also adapted to mobile devices, and that was in the same period as Swish was launched, 2012. And this is the major way that we actually identify ourselves everywhere today, starting out with logging into the mobile banking or internet banking. But now you identify you this way with all authorities, doing your tax reports, getting your tax refunds. And it's moving into the next generation. So now it's replacing the physical ID. So when I go to collect, for example, a package at the delivery shop, I actually identify myself with my mobile phone. I don't carry my physical ID anymore. It's with the digital where you actually sign. And also most utilities and also any other having sort of a login on an internet site, a club or a membership kind of thing, you always identify. So you don't need to carry any passwords or anything anymore, because you do this sign in as a digital with this digital identity. So and the infrastructure is of course very secure and robust, and it's based on all the the latest standard in security and so forth. And not knowing what it could be used for, the latest big success is that all dating apps now have that you sign in with digital identity, so that you can verify that you are you, so you know who you're dating. So that's sort of the latest feature in when you use your digital ID. I don't think that was on the map when this started out in the 90s. But it is really important to have this secure, and also I think talking about critical mass, or somehow the same way that everybody actually identifies themselves. The other thing that Yasha talked about, which is also, I think, really important, I think that's Australia has done a great job in creating this kind of aliases too, that you also have some way of identifying yourself. We have had it for a long time for corporates and paying to corporates, starting even in the 1950s. We had a corporate sort of alias that we still use when you pay your bills. Whereas for mobile payment, or the mobile wallets and the Swish service that I talked about, the phone number was the obvious choice. Then you don't need to give out your account number or know your account number. So I think the alias is a really vital part of this puzzle too when it comes to consumer products.
Right, definitely. Well, I agree with you, and I think that the alias that we've adopted here in Australia, the Pay ID, that people basically, you use your email or your mobile number, and people can pay directly to that, and that's linked to an account, and that has really revolutionized a lot of not just P2P but small merchant payments and so forth. So it's been quite an interesting and amazing change here. One of the things I wanted to talk about is data. So most of these systems, most of the newer systems, are based on ISO 20022. So, and a lot of what ISO 20022 brings is the promise of richer data. Even the North American systems, so RTR, RTP, and FedNow, are all going to be based on ISO 20022. So, Jean, I just wanted to throw to you in terms of the importance of data, and how is data going to factor into the success of these systems over the coming years?
Thanks, Brad. I'm going to look away because I want to read the quote from Ludwig Wittgenstein, the famous philosopher. "The limits of my language are the limits of my mind. All I know is what I have words for." So obviously, this has to do with the fact that ISO is a framework for defining vocabularies. It's the framework for defining common terms. And I actually begin before data. I think what's really interesting to me is vocabulary for new business processes. What we found is once you have the vocabulary for request to pay, we have found huge new opportunities for what that is. And it turned out to be one of the most useful and interesting things in real-time payments. Not just ability to request money, but to remind somebody that the money is due, to build AI around, well, how often should I remind people? When should I remind people? Can I time it so that I remind people to pay right after the paycheck hit their account? That sort of thing. The other is going into richer data. I'm going to take an example that I don't frequently hear about, but one of my colleagues in Europe used to be the treasurer for a major bank. And so when I ask him, hey, give me some cool examples of what ISO 20022 can be used for, he got all excited about how it has a lot more timestamps and much more much longer and much more precise timestamps. So he can now time the cash flows much more precisely and model them much more precisely. And so he is able to do cash management, maybe take it from the Bronze Age all the way down to Iron Age, maybe even to the Steam Age. The other example, and again, this is the one that we've all heard about, is that this is a much more structured format. So theoretically, you don't have to hunt for where is that address in the message. It's in the address field. And so you now can do a much better job around drug reporting and compliance and all of these things. Of course, keeping in mind that the bad actors will now take the address and try to hide it somewhere else, split it amongst the two fields. So, the work of the good guys is never done, even with the good format. I do want to say that a format is not a panacea, even the one as cool as ISO 20022. We've been here before. We've had EDI. It also had this raft of promises. We've been here with ISO 20022 as well. Zengen in Japan have gone to ISO 20022, I forget, 5, 7, 8 years ago, really early days, and had almost no take-up. And so you need an inflection point to make this useful. And so again, as Jenny said, stars have to align. You have to reach certain critical mass. You have to reach certain ubiquity. So part of the problem, for example, that we run into in US is people look at the remittance advice that comes with ISO 20022, and they say, we love it, we can read it, it's really good. But I've got the CTX thing, and it's all working, and why should I switch my business processes? So those are the sorts of things that we run into. And what I want to conclude is that real-time payments and ISO, they all lend themselves really well to crawl, walk, run method. So in real-time payments, you can start really small with really simple messages, really simple business cases, and continue to build up. With ISO, you can start with really simple messages, like a P2P message carries 3 fields. And the cool thing about ISO is simple concept as simple to express. So if you really need 5 things, you put 5 things. You don't need to build the superstructure of 30 things around it. Then complex things are complex, but you can get there gradually. The other thing that we all have to remember is it's a communication medium. So the fact that you can express a very complex thought or a concept does you no good if the receiver on the other side doesn't get it. So what we're seeing, whether it's SWIFT, whether it's national bodies, but there is a real need in having a managed evolution and managed maturity through the use of ISO. And SEPA did that through additional optional services and defining these at the country level. We in US have communities of practice. SWIFT has communities of practice. But the key thing with ISO is don't get over your skis too much. Make sure that you don't use the most sophisticated construct known to man if you want to communicate with every bank out there, because they're all at the different level of sophistication. And you can't forget your customers. You might have a sophisticated multinational like fraud or Tesla, but then you'll also be dealing with mom and pop. And so that's part of the challenge in a large bank such as mine, is being able to differ to different subsets and cater and manage different levels of complexity. But to come back to and wrap it all in the package, ISO is a next step in the evolution. It's human readable, it's multilingual, it's great if you communicate across borders, and allows you to start small and continue to grow. And most importantly, even though some variants of ISO are slightly different, like the ISO that Clearinghouse uses is subtly different from the ISO that Fed will use in a couple of messages and views on what should be used. But in the main, we now using the same message for the same thing. If it doesn't go through one rail, it will go through another. regardless of which rail it came through, it will look the same. It will go through the same compliance processes. There is great benefit in standardization that really results in massive accretion to the bottom line.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great, Gene. Look, I think, I mean, I never thought anyone would get excited about timestamps, but there you go. You learn something every day. Liz, I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about around faster payment systems is that it's not a system in the sense of providing a single sort of customer experience. It's almost like, rather than a toy you buy off the shelf, it's like a box of Lego that you can kind of assemble in a particular way. So how do banks and fintechs and others who are using these systems, how do they create those powerful customer experiences? And what are the types of powerful customer experiences that we have seen and we can expect to see with these systems in the future?
So that's a great way of framing it, actually, Brad. I look at it almost like we're building the motorway, and then people will figure out how to get on and off the motorway and how fast they can go, and whether it's a truck or a sports car, or, what are they driving on that motorway, and which passengers are they carrying, and where are we going? There's so many kind of parallels between those conversations about rails, and the interesting thing then is that when you talk to each and individual third party that might benefit from this, everyone's got their own ideas about what they want to do. I think some of the coolest things that I've seen personally in the last couple of weeks, WhatsApp has gone live in Brazil using Mastercard Send, and the idea that you have embedded transactions in that kind of a digital experience. So it's simple for the customer to use. It's really simple to understand, it's secure, it's immediate. And you start off with those things, they grow rapidly. I imagine that as we move forward, we're going to see the same things in places like, I don't know, I'm just making this up, TikTok, all those kind of e-commerce, online digital marketplaces, where actually this is really important, but it's important, but it's not the driver that brings people to the platform. Payments will become the embedded feature. I think what we're starting to see already is, I don't know if you've tried an electric car, Brad, but it's more complicated. You have to go plug it in somewhere. You have to have a subscription model to be able to plug it in somewhere. You've got to be able to pay for the electricity wherever you decide to charge it. As we move forward and we have cars that are driving themselves, and we have connected devices, how is all of this going to actually continue to function, and where you've got to charge for something, you've got to pay for something as you go along. So I think that's where we start to see an evolution of new features, new functionality, but also we're increasingly reaching out to a population that quite often has not been able to participate. So reaching out to people who are underbanked, and I would say that underbanked rather than necessarily unbanked, because I think there have been a lot of people who may have had access to a bank account of some kind, or maybe a savings and loan or credit union or some kind of facility, but they've never been able to participate in the economy in the way that people who are, who've got a smartphone and who have a digital neobank. So trying to embrace this and empower small businesses to be able to participate properly in the economy, to be able to actually pay for things that they need to pay for, whether it's paying for taxes but also supply chain. So being able to order goods, and where embedded payments and embedded credit checks and a whole range of other information is available. And for me, that's kind of moving us more towards open banking, more towards embedded finance, the DeFi kind of models that you start to see now, where actually people's transaction history has not historically necessarily been used very well to calculate their credit score or to calculate some kind of lending facility for them. So I think as we move forward, you're going to start to see much better use of the data sets that Gene was referencing earlier. What is it in those ISO 20022 messages that we can now look at as a basis for calculating someone's transaction history, and figure out then, based on what they've been doing, can we give them microcredit? Can we enable them to build their business? So that I think there's going to be just such a shift forward, where actually payments is just a bedrock of information, and an information flow that's moving at pace that will give you that kind of footprint as to what people have been doing, and some basis, along with things like AI or machine learning, to say, so how can we predict where we think this is going to go and whether this person, we should be able to enable far more for them.
Great. Look, we're kind of getting into the final 5 minutes now of our session, so I might just ask each of you to give us sort of your final thoughts, really around the challenges and the opportunities presented by faster payment systems to banks, fintechs, and so forth. So I might just throw to Jenny first. So sort of any sort of concluding thoughts and thoughts about what we should expect over the coming years.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's been a very interesting discussion today, and I really agree with Liz regarding. I also think that payments have been sort of a very separate process, but I think going forward it needs to be embedded and sort of part of an experience that is an experience of something else. I wanted to stress a bit regarding what I talked about earlier, the collaboration, but I also the things that I wanted to solve, being from a small country in that sense, it's the cross border and those features of paying, hopefully embedded to cross border. And my final finding is I think that payments is one of the most exciting businesses to be in right now. I think there will be a lot of things happening when we see, even though it stopped a bit, but continued internationalization and talks around the globe with what can be used. There are amazing things happening. India, for example, with their payments and how you actually can achieve a lot of those beautiful use cases for people that are underbanked, or that all kinds of good cases that we see. So really looking forward to what is going to happen.
Jean, maybe just a few brief concluding thoughts and sort of any other thoughts around sort of the opportunities and challenges over the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. So I'll do two things. One specifically for Canada. I think the real-time payments that are being done domestically is now a well understood application. And so it's mechanical in that sense. It is a project, you know what to do and you get it done. I think the interesting frontier would be cross-border. And clearly we know that lots of Canadian banks are active in US and vice versa. And we already see that Asia, once again, is ahead of Western hemisphere in getting cross-border real-time payments done. So that would be one thing in the short term. In the long term, I am thinking more about the battle of the ledgers, right? So we have, if I look at credit cards, that's a ledger. And once again, you do a payout or a pay-in, depending on whether you need to rebuild your balance or reduce it. And then we have all sorts of wallets around the world. And we see predictions that quite a significant chunk of money that's being held in accounts are going to migrate to these wallets. And so Venmo is very popular in the US. We sort of all know the Bcash and other money MNOs in various countries. So in many countries, real-time payments become connectors, cash in and cash out networks, corridors between different ledgers. And then even the conversation about central bank money, again, becomes a conversation of, do we want an open loop banking system or a closed loop central bank wallet? So those are going to be massive, massive policy-driven conversations that are going to play out very differently in different countries around the world. That's fun to see.
Yeah, that'd be great. Any final sentence here, Liz? We need to wrap up. We're almost on time. So any final thoughts, just briefly?
I think customer experience. We spent a lot of time making things really complicated again. We're going to have to simplify things so that customers understand exactly what they get when they sign up for something and what the experience, who's responsible, who's accountable, what happens if something goes wrong. We all build for the fantastic experience, but then things do go wrong. So I think simplifying the customer experience and clarifying at the forefront of everything we do has to be the next step.
I think that's a great way to end. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Jenny, Liz, and Jean. Thank you very much for an awesome session. I think thinking about the future, I love Jean's Wittgenstein quote. I'd like to have a quote from William Gibson, the Canadian science fiction writer, who said that the future is basically everywhere. It's just unevenly distributed. So I think that's sort of the world that we're living in at the moment. Thank you very much, everyone, for a great day. It was a great session. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone watching this session. You can follow up with our presenters on LinkedIn. I think they all have very active profiles. So thank you very much and have a good day. All the best. Thank you.